And we will spend some time in a specific slide talking about attention. The second of these underlying cognitive processes that we really need to have, that executive functions really don't work without, is inhibition. The idea of using certain neural networks within the prefrontal cortex to control impulses, to stop behaviors, to pause our reactions or responses long enough to consider alternatives, to plan a different response, or to plan an alternative and improved response. And the third one is working memory. And again, we'll speak more specifically to each of those. But without these three, attention, inhibition, and working memory, you will not have well-developed nor efficient functioning executive skills. So what do we mean by attention? There are different levels of attention. Attention is not all one concept, and different degrees of attention emerge and develop and mature at different age levels. Simple focused attention, the reaction to, the responsiveness to a sound, a voice, a face, a touch, a response, a stimulus to which we direct our attention momentarily. The realization that there's something out there and I need to engage in is not the same as, pardon the interruption, focused is not the same as sustained. Alright, so I had a brief interruption, so I'm back and we're resuming conversation about the 5 different levels of attention, where focused is just the emerging ability to recognize there's a stimulus and I'll direct my attention. That's not the same thing as being able to sustain your attention over time to a response. And that's a different developmental skill, and being able to maintain vigilance and to demonstrate cognitive endurance and to sustain attention over an expanded period of time, that's also a piece of how attention develops. Once those pieces are in place, then the ability to selectively attend, that is, I can focus my attention, I can sustain my attention over the course of a certain period of time. What I actually need to be able to do is selectively tune out the distracting, irrelevant, and selectively attend to just the relevant information. And that's a skill that really doesn't start to kind of come into the picture until 5, 6, around in there. Alternating attention. Now I not only can focus, I can sustain, I can selectively attend, tuning out irrelevant, unnecessary, distracting information. But I can also alternate my focused, selective attention between this piece of relevant information, and then I can alternate and shift to this piece of relevant information and go back and forth. Divided attention is when I'm able to manage multiple streams of incoming information simultaneously. We multitask all the time. We divide our attention between listening to what someone is telling me over here, to paying attention to an email coming up on the screen here, to holding on mentally to a thought that I have to write down in a minute or I'll forget it. When you tune the car radio, pay attention to 4 lanes of traffic, also drink your coffee, that's multitasking. That's dividing your attention. And of course that's a much more refined and highly developed form of attention than that emerging early form of just focused or sustained attention. So this is that foundational piece. If you have deficits in attention, think, for example, about ADHD or any other type of disorder for which attention is a component. If you are inattentive or attentive to the wrong things, how accurate will those other decision-making skills of executive functions be? They won't be. Okay, inhibition, the second underlying cognitive process that is so critical to executive functions. Inhibition allows, it's a delay. It's an imposed delay, a withholding of a behavior or an impulse or a response long enough to allow us to engage in better planning or to organize our behavior or response a little bit more efficiently. Inhibition is that function that allows us to withhold or stop inappropriate behaviors, impulsive responses, destructive behaviors. As inhibition emerges and develops, it's the basis for delayed gratification. That is this idea that I can hang on to my urge, my desire, my need, my intent long enough to allow a better optimal result later on. Inhibition is quite dependent on attention. If you can't focus or identify relevant information to selectively attend to, then how do you know which things you should inhibit? So even though I've just said they're related, they're also quite distinct and quite separate. And you can actually identify different individuals will have no difficulty with inhibition, but might have a significant amount of difficulty with selective attention. They are different things. And third is working memory, the idea that we have to store immediate information in a temporary holding place, whether it's verbal working memory or visual working memory. That function is a part of the prefrontal cortex. Specifically, working memory is associated with the dorsolateral aspect of the frontal lobe, as is attention. These two cognitive processes, attention and working memory, are closely related. With poor attention, your working memory is likely to also be foundationally not sound. So working memory, I need a holding place. It's temporary. It's the place mentally where I take in all the incoming environmental information. I pull up all the old experience and prior knowledge that I have that's relevant to this situation. I link that up with previous past memories stored in long-term memory. What do I know about this kind of situation from before? And I pull up the limbic system is putting itself forward and saying, yes, but the urge, the impulse, the desire, the drive to do X is also here. Here's this working memory, this temporary storage place where everything has to be juggled and mentally held so that the different variables can be manipulated by executive functions. Working memory is a recurrent need. We are constantly reassessing which pieces of information from our environment need to go into working memory. We are constantly needing to pull up different stores from long-term memory for comparison. We are constantly needing to hold these variables, different variables in working memory in order to generate a plan or a new plan or a different plan or a strategy. Working memory is sort of your mental tablet. It's your workspace, and that's where all the organizational decision-making planning takes place. And without that, your executive functions are not going to be as efficient. So 3 underlying cognitive processes, and then now we see the slide where I've listed the 6 components of executive functions. And if you were to go do a research of the literature or to do some of your own reading and pull up different topics in this area, if you keyed in any of these 6 terms, you would find a wealth of information. Different authors might vary the terms here or there, but for the most part, these are the main 6 that will get broken down into individual, separate skills, the formal and informal tests that are available now to look at executive functions. We'll talk about these 6 specific skills. And in brain injury literature, in the acquired frontal lobe deficit, in that body of literature, again, you'll see these same terms. And now we're talking about how they relate to the developmental perspective. So they are, and we'll go through each of them. Goal selection, planning and organization, initiation and persistence, flexibility, execution and goal attainment, and then finally self-regulation. Each of these 6 is very dependent on those 3 underlying cognitive processes: the attention, the inhibition, and the working memory. So let's look at these one by one.